Hi, everyone. This is our fifth video on market trends and drivers. And in this last video in the series, we'll be talking about a very sensitive topic, but one that is nevertheless very important, and that is the threats to the United States and otherwise its relationships with other countries. I think you'll find it interesting. This will be, you'll be glad to hear one of the shorter videos in this series. At least that's my expectation. We'll wind up with a somewhat different topic altogether for a very short remark about education and what's going on in that industry. And it won't take us very long to go over that. So with that, let me see if I can get things going here. As you may recall, I don't always have an easy time getting this thing to work. It's probably my aptitude as much as it is the system. Okay, let's see if we can do this. There we go. We're going to talk about international conflict and international relations and tensions. Let's start off with just a few basic points here to get the groundwork. The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, not long ago did a survey, a poll. They asked other government agencies that had some insight into these issues, what the threats to the United States were. And the departments that they asked included the Department of Defense, the Department of State, Homeland Security, and National Intelligence Director. So these folks know what they're talking about. And they came up with 26 threats. I'm not going to go over all 26 with you, but I'm going to go over the top 6. I can tell you that the other 20 are important, but they're not as vital from a marketing and industry strategy perspective. So although we won't go over those 20, if you want to do that, I'll be glad to put you in touch with that document, or you could even just Google it and get it. But here are the top 6, and the first one probably is no surprise. It's what's going on in China, and China seems to be the #1 adversary of the United States today. And it's taking aggressive action diplomatically in relations with other countries, trying to be more impressive. Economically, China's GDP on a purchasing power parity basis became larger than the US GDP back in 2013, I think. And since then, the gap between that economy and ours has widened. So in the aggregate, the Chinese economy is larger than the US economy. China's been building military resources at a great rate, and I think it's probably underestimated simply because it's so difficult to get a good measurement of exactly where that power lies. But we do know that China's making great strides with its Air Force, with its space endeavors. Cyberspace we hear about all the time, and to a somewhat lesser extent, its Navy. It doesn't have big naval ships, but it has lots of smaller, medium-sized ships. And of course, its efforts in electronic warfare have been pretty widely publicized recently. So that's number one on the list. Number two, which used to be number one, is Russia's global expansion. And here we see in some ways, a more sophisticated capability with regard to the use of directed energy attacks, lasers and guided energy light beams. It's obviously, we hear a lot about Russia's attempt to influence US politics. I don't know. I can't figure out how much of that is real and how much it isn't. But based upon what we hear in the news, at least some of this must be for real. And I've visited Russia, and I don't perceive among the Russian people the kind of adversity that we hear about in the news. So, and I've also visited China, where the only thing I noticed was everybody was in a hurry. China is just explosive in its economic development. So, although these two countries may be our adversaries militarily, economically, there's something else going on, and we'll see it in exhibits later on. China's economic expansion is just it's rivaling the U.S. economy. That's not true in Russia. Russia's economic expansion is not very impressive. Iran, I think we all have heard about just how difficult our relationships with Iran have become. And Iran's intelligence forces, its espionage, its support of other countries that are troubled by terrorism or simply adversaries of the United States is pretty well known. The thing that bothers us about Iran is that it does seem to be developing the capability to build and employ intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. North Korea has ICBMs, and we have certainly heard in the news about North Korea and its potential to threaten this country. And then we have a variety of what should be called unstable governments, I guess. And we'll see an exhibit pretty soon with a list of about 20 countries where political climate is very unstable. There have been conflicts within and between these countries, and altogether, they represent a threat because it's in those countries where terrorist organizations like Boko Haram can form. And from their bases in Afghanistan, for instance, terrorists have even attacked the United States through ISIS and other extremist organizations. So unstable governments are an often unrecognized source of conflict with the U.S., but they're very real, and because there are so many of them, they're very difficult to comprehend. And finally, terrorism all by itself, again, the terrorist organizations in the world seem to have an objective to make life just about as unpleasant for the U.S. and for Europe as possible. And since the coronavirus has arrived, it's not just the potential ability of terrorists to employ chemical weapons or conventional weapons or even nuclear weapons. but now biological weapons. One thing that the coronavirus has taught the terrorists is that it's really not that difficult to bring a country to its knees. All you have to do is get some microbes or some a particularly troublesome virus into a country and have it infect a few people, and the virus will do the rest for you. And we've seen what the impact of the coronavirus has been on this country and other countries. So put yourself in the place of an evil-minded terrorist. The terrorists at this point have very much got the idea that they can attack this and other countries without a great deal of cost or even difficulty. It's a whole lot easier to smuggle a virus into a country than it is to smuggle in a nuclear bomb. And in fact, that's exactly how the coronavirus got here from China, isn't it? People simply traveled here from China before we knew that the coronavirus had broken out. So this is a new threat. Here are just a few pictures of these threats that I happened to pick up in my wandering through the internet. The one on the left was taken in Red Square, a place where I've been, and we see a picture of Russian mobile missiles. I haven't been to Tehran, the picture on the right, but you can see again the president of Tehran, I'm sorry, Iran. Tehran is its capital. But the president of Iran overseeing a parade again with missiles. The one on the left is China. Yes, I've been there. And, you know, if you recall in one of our earlier videos, we talked about the problem of obesity in the United States and what that's doing to our national health and economy. You see any fat people in that picture? I don't. China's military has become large and capable. This picture was taken last year, just about almost a year ago, but it's quite recent. And even since that picture, I think we can assume that China has continued to develop, even as it endured and overcame the coronavirus. I might add, just as a personal note, that the coronavirus seems to have formed in Wuhan, and I think about what was it, 2 years ago or 3 years ago? I can't remember now. But I was in Wuhan. I'm certainly glad that I got out before the coronavirus broke out. No, I'm not one of the people that brought it back to the United States. Finally, the picture on the right. I think that we really have to take that one seriously. North Korea now has intercontinental ballistic missiles, and it is a very economically unstable country where there are incentives for the leader of that country to be aggressive. And so and in particular in the Pacific region, as much as globally. We need to be well aware of North Korea's threat. Here's an interesting picture. I'm not sure where I picked it up, but this is a picture taken from a Chinese propaganda film, which was viewed by the Chinese population. And in this particular scene, the Chinese Navy and missiles are wiping out the U.S. Navy in the South China Sea. As you may have heard, there's quite a lot of conflict over the extent to which China has a right to be the most influential power in the South China Sea. The United States has insisted that those are international waters, but over time we see China developing the islands into air bases. And it's clear that the Chinese government wants the Chinese population to know that it's preparing for conflict in the South China Sea, and that if such a conflict should occur, that it would prevail. That's food for thought, isn't it? Okay, so by the way, there is indeed an implication of all of this for U.S. industry and markets. And I'll come to that later on in this video. But in case you're wondering whether this is a course on political science or strategic management, it's probably a little bit of both, because strategic management does get political, but in any event, you'll hear about the industrial and market consequences in just a few minutes. If you'd like to know more about these issues, you can look at these YouTube videos and learn more about the conflict between US, Russia, China, as well as those two countries' armed forces. You might find it interesting. Let's move on then and take a look at the international landscape, and particularly the various diplomatic and military threats. This is a graph of the number of embassies, military posts that various countries have in the world. And I hope you notice that there are two lines that are going up. One is the yellow line, and that's China's diplomatic posts, which go from about 262 to about 278, something like that. But that's a lot of embassies to put up in 3 years. That's a lot in 3 years. So, and rather interesting is the other one, which is Japan, which Japan clearly wants to become more influential and have a stronger base in foreign countries than it had in 2016. So it moves from about 220 to about 245, 25 embassies in 3 years. Now, they're not all embassies, they're legations and offices and so forth. So, you know, in the case of China, they don't do things small. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if those are fairly substantial installations. Not so sure with Japan, but nevertheless, you can see that the Japanese have developed a keen interest in diplomatic relations in just the last few years. We need to come to grips with this problem with China. And regrettably, there's no way we can do that satisfactorily because first, we don't know enough, and second, it's in a state of flux. But what we can see is that the investment by Chinese businesses, which often are controlled by the Chinese government, but not always. But state-owned enterprises are quite common in China. And we can see that in 2016, there was quite a lot of investment, over $45 billion, as opposed to the last couple of years where it's almost dried up. And prior to 2016, it was a lot less. But if you look at the bar charts, it was rising. The amount of investment from U.S. to China, the light blue bars, has been pretty stable over those years, and by and large has been significantly larger than investments from China, except there in 2016 and 17. So, something's changing. And one of the things that's changing is again, diplomatic relations and the clearance by the U.S. government of investments by Chinese enterprises. Now, we hear in the news about TikTok and some of the other Chinese. I'm trying to think of the other one that's made so much news. Perhaps it'll come to me. Uh, uh, I can't bring it up. In any event, that's probably reflective of what those big blue bars in 2016 and 17 are reflective of. But the red line on the right, in the right graph, indicates the number of cleared transactions. And you can see that they were going up and then dropped like a stone. And the reason for that is the current administration's tougher stance with China. And as a result, the amount of venture capital from China into the U.S. Has tailed off. So that's an issue. There's not a value judgment here, because in some cases we just need to be very careful of national security. And a company that looks as innocuous as TikTok might not be. The other one that I'm trying to think of is Huawei. That's it. Huawei is a leader in 5G telecommunications, and the U.S. has taken a position that Huawei, if it installs telephone systems in the U.S., has a very convenient device for monitoring what's going on in the U.S. So was it a good decision to prohibit Huawei from building telephone systems in the U.S.? Probably. But did that impair telecommunications in the U.S.? And there you get different points of view. In any event, here is a list, a very recent list of industries where China is very influential. And we can see that in this case, China accounts for at least 20% of the global market in these technology-related industries. And in the case of electronics, more than a third. Now, the U.S. doesn't account for all the rest because these industries exist in other countries as well. So when you take that into account, you've got to be impressed by just how influential China is in electronic components. computer processing, internet software, appliances, retailing through the online competitors of Amazon, for instance, semiconductors, electronic equipment, and so on. And as we know, China is making every effort to increase its rate of growth in these industries and its influence. So if those are its measures of its importance today, a year from now, those bars will probably move further to the right. What do we want to do about that? Do we want to engage with China in trade? You know, the economists tell us that that's a healthy thing to do. Or do we want to protect our own industries, or in some cases, protect our national security, as in the case of Huawei? We've got a question here about influence of China, Russia, the United States, and so forth. So a survey was done some time ago, I guess 2017, by a very reputable market research firm. Pew Research is a really capable, non-political firm. So if they give you an answer, you ought to believe it. So the question of people in the Mideast was, what countries in the world are most influential in the Mideast? And the #1 position was Russia, which beat out Turkey by just a percentage point, which beat out the United States by a percentage point. But those are the top 3, followed not too distantly by Iran. So the U.S. is certainly there. 63%, 62% of the people who were surveyed believe that the U.S. is gaining prominence in that region. But the U.S. wasn't the only country gaining prominence in that region. Russia was equally influential, Turkey, and not too far behind Iran, and behind Iran, Israel, and then Saudi Arabia. Egypt, not very much. Then if we look at the right graph on the right, we see another question, and that is, are the US and Russia more influential today than they were 10 years ago? When they ask people in these various countries that you see listed there, in Lebanon, 77, more than 3/4 of the respondents said yes, Russia's more influential, and 64%, still a large proportion, about the same as the percent in the left chart there, region-wide, but not growing as fast, apparently, in its influence as Russia. Jordan gives us pretty much the same answer. Even our arch ally, Israel, felt that Russia was gaining in influence more than the United States. Now, that's really food for thought. Something else that I made mention of this just a few minutes ago, but it's really important to point out. Let me take a drink here to bolster my courage. And more importantly, to moisten my throat. There are, I believe, 17 countries listed here. And since 2014, they've all been in a state of conflict. within and between themselves. So, pardon me, there has simply been a lot of conflict and dissension and warfare in these lesser developed nations: Yemen, Ukraine, Turkey, Thailand, Syria, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Pakistan, Nigeria. You get the message. Um, and over time, the good news is, by the way, these bars represent the number of fatalities from conflict in these regions. And again, we always wonder whether the numbers are right because it's kind of difficult to count them, especially when the combat is in guerrilla warfare. Nevertheless, when the folks who made this chart did their analysis, they did give us one piece of good news, and that is the fatality of conflict in these underdeveloped nations in the Mideast and in Africa have subsided. Nevertheless, I think it gets down to only 100,000 per year, whereas in 2014 it was about 230,000. But the point simply is that we can't look just at China and Russia and Iran and North Korea to find our adversaries and points of conflict around the world. There are many of them, and that's what this chart really demonstrates. If you look down at the very bottom of the chart, the red bars are Afghanistan, and that continues to be the #1 hotspot in the world. And it has every capability of of increasing again in the extent of conflict, as do several of these other nations. So again, later on here, we'll draw some conclusions, but suffice it to say that the world is pretty disorderly now. And the world isn't real peaceful. Even our country, I think you'll agree, is far less peaceful than it has been in the past. Why? That is for the political scientists to debate. But suffice it to say that some of the influence that has stimulated the conflict within our country may have come from some of these locations, as well as our larger adversaries. Now, what's also interesting is that when we survey the American public, rather than the experts in our government, we get a different priority list, a different list of issues regarding American security. So here is on the left a survey that was done by Pew Research this year in March. You and I, or the majority of our neighbors, think that the spread of infectious disease, no surprise there, is the #1 threat that you and I face. Terrorism is close behind, and tied with it is the spread of nuclear weapons. And then cyber attacks, not too different. And it's only after those top 4 that we find China's power. And down further, a couple of layers lower is Russia. In between China and Russia, of global climate change, which we've talked about in another video. So the point here is that these are also, some of these that were not on the other list are also threats, but the threats that are viewed by the U.S. government and its establishment may not be identical to those that are perceived by the population generally. To make matters worse, if you look at the right graph, you should draw one conclusion, and that is that on several of these issues, there are wide divisions between the political parties. So in the case of climate change, the Republicans don't do that as important as the Democrats do, and so forth. If we go down to the very bottom where we see the global migration, then we see the Republicans are more concerned than the Democrats. There are also a lot of issues where the Republicans and the Democrats agree, and so we can move forward on those. For instance, conflicts between countries, where the graph we were looking at just a couple minutes ago, long-standing conflicts between countries and ethnic groups. There's pretty much agreement there. The spread of infectious diseases, there's pretty much agreement there. The spread of nuclear weapons, there's agreement. The cyber attack problem and China's power and terrorism. So there is agreement, and there is disagreement among the political parties. Where there's disagreement, it becomes very difficult to form national consensus and take a point of view and take a direction to deal with it. This is a chart that I'll let you look at your convenience. It just shows that most of these issues, perhaps with the exception of cyber attacks, are on the increase insofar as the extent to which we're concerned about them, but almost three quarters of the population is concerned about cyber attacks, so it's already at a pretty high level. This is a really, I guess, interesting chart. You'll see why here in a minute. But the chart on the left is the result of a survey, again by Pew, so we've got to believe it. But it's a response from you, me, and our neighbors about the extent to which the United States is respected and whether global respect for the U.S. has diminished or not. And the dark line, the heavy line, is just less respected, and the dotted line is the portrays that it's not only is it an issue, but it's a major problem from a security point of view. And you can see that among Republicans, the Republicans felt that, yes, the U.S. was less respected, and that was a real problem until just recently here, maybe somewhere around 2016, it really came down. I wonder why the Republicans felt that respect for the United States no longer was such a great problem beginning in 2016. If you haven't figured it out, that's when the last national election occurred. And so with Mr. Trump's arrival, the Republicans weren't so concerned about it. However, if we look at the chart on the right, we will see that up until 2016, give or take, the Democrats weren't so concerned. They were, but not like they were after 2016. Then the Democrats became concerned. And so what do we have here? Do we have a reflection of objectivity among the American population? No, we have a reflection of people's opinions based upon what they hear from other people that influence them. This is not a good way to formulate national policy. There ought to be a better way. The chart on the right simply reflects the extent to which some more of those issues that we've already talked about constitute major threats to the United States. And we can see that when this survey was done, North Korea was viewed as a major threat. Cyber attacks, we've heard about those before. ISIS, the Islamic militant group, and climate change. Iran, Russia, and China down at the bottom. Remember that the government experts, and they are experts, they had Russia and China at the top. So there's a need to bring people's opinions together, or for the government to get their act together and communicate with us better. In any event, there's a lot of disorientation, I suppose you'd call it. And so with regard to ISIS, we have again this funny juxtaposition. Is the campaign against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, how's that going? The approval has picked up beginning about 2016, and disapproval has fallen about 2016. Is it going well? Yes, it's going better since 2016, and fewer people think it's not going so well since 2016. So maybe Mr. Trump and the current administration, military-wise, has accomplished something there. If we take a look at the Republican evaluations against ISIS, you can see another one of these funny changes that occur with elections. The red line are Republicans and the blue line Democrats. So we've seen the campaign results over on the left. What about the approval of that campaign? Obviously in 2016, the red line shoots up. The Republicans are, behind their guy. And the Democrats, the good news is that their approval doesn't fall off. So it doesn't fall off. So generally there's approval with the Republicans really leading the charge up there. Some 82% of Republicans approve the way the campaign is going as of 2017. So first of all, they approve it, and then do they think it's going well? Up until 2016, the Republicans didn't think it was going very well. But after 2016, they did. Again, the Democrats sort of stayed, kept their position, maybe even increased it a little bit after 2016. But the point of this chart is, like the last one, is simply to show how public opinion can drift and shift, notwithstanding the facts. I think the list that we showed of the 6 most important issues as judged by those experts, that one is probably not reflective of politics so much. But it certainly is true that public opinion does shift and drift. Here we have another example of what I've just been talking about. You can see the red dots represent Republicans' opinions and the blue Democrat. So with regard to Iran's nuclear program as a problem, we can see that a lot more Republicans are concerned about that, as they are about what's going on in Syria and Iraq. On the other hand, if you're talking about global climate change or Russia's power, you can see that the Democrats are more concerned. And then these other items, there's less differences of opinion. And now, this is the last chart of evidence before we get to the conclusions, but this one is a concern. And it reflects the proportion of the population. Remember, this was done by a legitimate research organization, but it's the proportion of people who would approve a first strike by the United States against an adversary, and assuming that there's a serious threat posed by that adversary, and presumably it may not be absolutely certain that if we don't strike first, they will. But there are a lot of these small strikes that you hear about in the news going on all the time. It doesn't have to be nuclear, but simply an initial action by one side against the other. In any event, in the most recent survey that I have, was done in the fall of 2017, and half of the population felt that it would sometimes or often be okay to do that. Now, again, there's not a value judgment here. This simply reflects the fact that people are vividly aware that we do have adversaries and that they are threatening. If you add the two brown bars, you will see that when you get all the way down to the bottom, they total 67. So back in 2003, 2/3 of the American population thought that if there's justification, it's okay for us to make the first move. Since 2005, it's hung in there at a little bit over 50%. And over time, the proportion of folks that feel that it's okay to make these initial moves has diminished somewhat. Nevertheless, the portion of folks who don't agree with that point of view still are in the minority, although that minority has grown. So all of this, of course, attitudes like this can have a great deal of impact on markets and people's attitudes about not just the government, but among other things, the defense industry. So let's just sort of summarize. We've got these 6 major issues that government agencies have told us are at the top of the list, with China and Russia being at the top, and Iran and North Korea being there with them, along with those unstable governments in that list of 17 that I showed you, and terrorism. So Here are the most bona fide, verified threats to the United States. And then we have these others that the public has in mind with, needless to say, infectious disease. There's no surprise there. But terrorism, nuclear weapons, cyber attack, China and Russia are there. They're taken seriously, but not quite as seriously as the government agencies do. The good news in most cases is that the political parties, the organizations that make up the government, generally can agree on major issues such as intercountry conflict, spread of disease, nuclear weapons, cyber attacks, China, terrorism. But Democrats are more concerned than Republicans about climate change, surprisingly about Russia, global poverty, and deterioration of the global economy, whereas Republicans are more concerned about migration of populations, primarily as a security matter, as both for military and economic reasons. But what we see in the news is that there's concern that when people come into this country, they may not be coming for the right reasons. Another survey, you may recall, looked at global respect for the United States as a major problem. 70% of Democrats now perceive that problem. Only 28% do now that we have a more aggressive leadership in the government. The Republicans and Democrats are in general agreement on threats from North Korea and China, but they do differ with regard to some pretty important issues. One is Iran's nuclear program, another is ISIS and Russia, and global climate change. And the R+13 means that the Republicans view the matter as in this case, Iran's nuclear program, 18% more than the Democrats do. The D +55 means that 55% more Democrats take that issue seriously than do Republicans. So in these four issues, it's going to be hard to get a consensus and perhaps to take the kind of action that should be taken. So one thing's for sure, and that is that I've got a number, 20 different countries. I think that's supposed to be 17. You saw the exhibit. But we can't lose sight of the fact that there is conflict in a large number of countries and therefore regions around the world. If you take into account that these countries are in Africa and the Mideast, those are large parts of the world. Then you take into account China and Asia and North Korea in Asia and Russia and what might be considered northeastern Europe. You have a lot of the world in disarray and under tension. So in one of those regions, the Mideast, the United States is certainly not the only country that's exerting influence. In the case of the US, it's probably to bring order or maintain order. Not sure about Russia and Turkey. but we're not the only player on the stage any longer, if we ever were the only one. So from the perspective of pure economics and commerce, it's somewhat troubling that China's investment in the United States has fallen off because of this tension and disagreement between the two governments. And one reason for that is because China's industries, 6 of them on this list, are able to provide us with things that we need. And their markets, Chinese markets, are very large and able to absorb what we can supply China, not least of which is agricultural products. But there's a lot more. The largest market for cars in the world by far is China. And the largest producer of cars in China is General Motors. General Motors makes and sells more cars in China than it does in the United States. The second, by the way, in China is Volkswagen. So here again, you know, to the extent that these tensions increase, and to the extent that we're vying for influence with China and Russia in the Mideast and Africa, that makes it more difficult to have friendly commercial relations in China or the United States or Europe. So we have some conclusions. First, the US and Russia, according to this report, ranked #1 in military power. I'm a little uncomfortable with that, simply because I think it's difficult to measure the amount of military might that is produced in a country if what you're getting is reports of how much is spent for military products. If you will, suppose, and I'm going to use an extreme example here, but just suppose that China reports that it's spending $1,000 for every jet airplane, and the United States is spending $1 million for, or nearly so, on every one of its jet fighters. So if China reports that it spends a lot less than the U.S. Does on fighter jets, does that mean that China's inventory of fighter jets is a lot lower than the U.S. inventory? And you quickly realize that it's not what is reported in the accounting and the numbers of expenditures, but actually the number of vehicles or airplanes. And the same is true of guns and bombs and so forth. Nevertheless, the judgment here is that the U.S. and Russia rank #1 and #2. Even then, it's not lopsided. The U.S. has a stronger air force with more bases and fighter jets and bombers than Russia does. But on the ground, Russia's forces are stronger. Why is that? Because Russia, over the years, has had to deal with its adversaries in Europe. And so it's built the capabilities and the practice to conduct warfare on the ground rather than in the air. So there's no surprise there. China's military power is growing quite rapidly in all modes. The next time we get a report, we'll find out that it's grown even further and faster in the land, sea, air, and space. China's got a space program. China's importance as a military adversary as well as a commercial adversary is now, in many respects, greater than Russia's. The North Korean and Iranian threats are quite real because they sponsor terrorism. In addition, Iran's economy is also growing, so it's more influential in the Mideast than North Korea, certainly. But you may recall that it was number 2 in that survey of growing influence in the Mideast, along with Russia and the United States. So again, I think sometimes it's difficult to appreciate what's right in front of us. And so here we have the coronavirus, and you and I are concerned about wearing a mask and hope we don't get it from our neighbors or our classmates. But if you're a terrorist, you see the coronavirus as a cause for hope and optimism, because it's pretty easy to get a virus, put it in a little container, and take it across a border, infect a few people, and leave. And the next thing you know, the country that you left it in, especially if you dropped it in more than one location, is going to get real sick, just like countries all around the world are now sick from the coronavirus. Terrorists think this is a cause for optimism. It's not nearly as expensive to spread a virus as it is a nuclear weapon. So we must draw a conclusion here. And that is, I've put on the last bullet here, a reasonable conclusion is that the US defense industry is going to witness growing demand to support very large, complex national defense systems of both conventional and unconventional nature. But it goes beyond that. It's not the conventional military and defense industry that we're talking about here. It's also homeland defense and intelligence agencies and electronics and cyber countermeasures and our own cyber warfare. So electronics, the electronics industry, as well as the military equipment industry, the companies that make aircraft like Boeing and Lockheed and Northrop, we can expect that they're going to have a lot more demand for what they do. The same for our shipbuilders and for the manufacturers of military equipment. We're going to see the U.S. defense budget have to go up. If it doesn't, that'll be unfortunate. And when we get around to talking about the U.S. economy, we'll take a look at the U.S. defense budget. And I think you may find some interesting trends there. But it goes beyond the conventional military establishment, the so-called military-industrial complex, but into electronics and artificial intelligence and a large chemical and biological industries. So this situation that we find ourselves in globally represents a very large stimulus for economic growth, albeit for unfortunate reasons. And with that, I will conclude this diatribe on threats to the United States. But it's an important part of the puzzle, and it often gets overlooked. Now, I've just got a couple more slides to show you, and this video will be over. But I promised you that the last part of this video and this series would be on the U.S. education industry. And so let me introduce you to PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. It's conducted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, a very reputable organization. It's headquartered in Europe, and among other things, and it studies lots of issues. Its purpose is to provide information. And OECD studies educational attainment at a number of levels. Little kids, high school students, college students, and people who have left college and moved on into their careers. And they try to contrast the accomplishment of different countries, educationally in this case, to see who's doing best and who's doing worse, or not doing as well. And based on the findings from those surveys, we can draw some conclusions about where intellectual industries are likely to grow most successfully. So if a country is growing or doing better than other countries in its education, we can assume that the folks who go from the educational institutions into their industries, and for that matter, their militaries, but those economies will, in the future, tend to outperform other countries. The survey results that I'm going to show you are the most widely publicized, and the PISA surveys look at high school juniors. These are the folks who are getting ready to go to college. And by the time the survey, it takes over a year or about a year to consolidate the data from something like 50 countries are surveyed. 50 countries are members of OECD, and the OECD includes in its surveys even countries that are not members of OECD, such as China and Russia. So you get a very broad perspective worldwide of where educational attainment is doing well and not. The most recent survey was done in 2018. And then the results were compiled in 2019. There are so many countries and so many data to be compiled. And at the very end of last year, in December, these results were published. So let's see, 18, 19, 20, and 2021, they'll do another survey every 3 years. I hope you've already looked at these data and been shocked by them. But you can see that and there are 3 categories here. We'll look at a couple other categories in the next slide, but here we're looking at reading comprehension, mathematics, and science. And you can see that there are 77 or 78 countries in this survey. So it's pretty much a worldwide survey. You may notice, let's just start with reading, but China comes in first. Maximum score of 600. Singapore, which is a China-influenced country, comes in second. And then if you look at the little footnote, Macau, a Chinese province, comes in third, and Hong Kong, another China, fourth. So there's no doubt about it. China and its clients are winning the race in reading. Now, what's also interesting is the US comes in 13th. Although there are 77 countries in the survey, I don't think we can take a lot of joy from the result that the US comes in 13th. An interesting finding is that Canada, our neighbor to the north, comes in 6th. Now that's really interesting because you can drive across the border into Canada and you don't notice a great deal of change. Now it really depends on the province. I've done a lot of business in Canada, both east and west. I speak French, so I like to go to Quebec, where things really are different. But regardless of whether you're in Ontario or British Columbia out west or Alberta, what you see is an educational system that somehow accomplishes more than the U.S. educational system does. There are, I think, some of the reasons for these differences are well known. Again, we're not in the School of Education, so I won't get into those, but having traveled through these regions, I think I get an idea of where the differences lie. But suffice to say that where the US comes in 13, Canada comes in a whole lot better. By the way, the missing, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. The top 4 in China, the 5th one is Finland, which is well known to have a very fine education system as well. If we move over to mathematical accomplishment, we see even more dramatic differences. Again, if the top score is 600, look at China with a score of 591, Singapore 569, US 478. Our neighbor to the south, Mexico, 409, but Canada, 512. And in this case, it's moved up a notch. It's number 12. Again, the Chinese provinces just walk away with the kudos. China, Singapore, then Macau, number 3 again, a Chinese province. Hong Kong, number 4, and Taipei, number 5. So there you have it. I'm sorry, Canada's number 12. It hasn't moved up, it's moved down from number 6 to number 12. I got that backwards. Anyway, Canada still outguns us by a country mile. Its rank is 12th as opposed to the US 37. And oh my God, Russia is ranked 30, way behind China, and significantly ahead of the United States. We really want to think about what these results are telling us insofar as our ability to conduct economic competition with China in particular. If we move over to the right, we see the accomplishment in science. And once again, China and Singapore are at the top. Canada moves back up to a higher position with number 8. And again, right behind Singapore, we have Macau and Hong Kong. So the top 4 positions are Chinese. And the U.S. does better, certainly does better in science than it does in math, which is confuses me a bit because we usually relate the accomplishment in mathematics to accomplishment in science. And so I think that, perhaps, my colleagues in the physical sciences departments, I wish they were here to help me, but as I recall, physics relies much more on mathematics than chemistry and biology. And so I would assume that the US picked up its position from accomplishments in biology and perhaps chemistry, but maybe not so much in physics, which has a stronger military connotation to it. So if we simply look at these results, and I'm not going to read the conclusions for you, I've pretty much gone through it. But if you look at these most recent results from the PISA studies, you can see that we've got a real capable competitor in China, and that it's producing students that are able to do especially well in the sciences and otherwise, based on their results from reading, and that when those folks get into industry, they can do really well when maybe some of our folks in the same industries can't do as well. I wish I had a different way to say that, or a way to make it seem less unpalatable. But I think the most important thing is to come to grips with the reality here. And that is that the US really needs to get its educational act together. Let's look at the next slide. This slide is based upon PISA surveys that were done previously, and it's just a scattering of other results that I threw in here from other surveys. I've collected the PISA studies for several years and sort of pored over them and tried to understand what they're telling us. What I can tell you is that over the years, the US has had a higher position, and that over the years, it's come down in its standing. And this is confirmed by other OECD studies that take a look at college graduates and folks that have gotten out of college and are now working. And if they were college graduates, how well do they do in their ability to do mathematics and so forth? And among those folks, the US does just fine, or a lot better anyway. Then you take a look at current college graduates, and whoops, the US drops a little. Then you get to the high school students, and you got the high school juniors who are getting ready to go into college, and you've got this great big difference. So what this suggests is that universities and colleges in the United States have less quality in the material that they have to work with. How do we come to grips with this? This, I think, is probably one of the most pivotal strategic issues that the United States has to face. But because it's not as sexy politically as a lot of other issues, it doesn't get the attention that it certainly should. It gets lip service from the politicians, but there are, again, reasons that I'm not going to get into, even though I'd like to, that for this decline that we've experienced. Anyway, in a recent survey, and I think this may go back to 2012, but let's say, or 2015, but the and one, I believe, a survey, they survey some questions, not every year. They survey them in different, some specific questions in different years. That's why we may not get all the same answers in every survey. Anyway, the portion of 25 to 34-year-olds with college degrees, the US ranks number 9 in terms of the proportion. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. You've heard the term STEM, and we're ranking 23rd among 25 to 34-year-olds. These are the folks who are employed. And so the survey measures the number of folks who have STEM degrees per 100,000 people, and we ranked 23rd. The percent with bachelor's degrees, just plain old bachelor's degrees, way back in 2008 was, and again, these are bachelor's degrees in science, technology, and engineering, and mathematics, we ranked 27th. So science, technology, and engineering and mathematics until recently wasn't a terribly popular group of disciplines for students to want to get into, and still, as you can see, we need to keep making progress. From some prior surveys, mathematics, science, and reading, we saw those in the most recent survey in the prior slide. So in mathematics, back there in the earlier survey, we were 25, now 37. So don't misread what you see here. But the reason I put these survey results is that they included literacy, our ability, the ability of our students to read the literature of science and the literature of mathematics, and especially important to do problem solving. And the results are not all that pleasing. So this again, this represents a serious challenge for the United States. And by the way, let me, you'll be pleased to know that's the very last slide. So, and I'll bring this thing up so that I can spend a minute with you and we'll be all done. But I think that, you know, we've gone through 5 videos here to talk about trends in market conditions, industry conditions, and drivers of market conditions in the future. I hope that these videos will have enlightened and stimulated you if they didn't bore you to death. And that maybe you got some suggestions on where you might find some opportunities to develop your own career. But this last set of slides, these last 2 slides on education, point out something else. And that is that, sadly, here in the United States, you may not have gotten all that you deserve from your educational experience. Sometimes that's because of culture, and frankly, that you haven't demanded or wanted to get enough. But either way, we've seen from all of these videos that things are changing very rapidly. Markets are changing very rapidly. Industries are changing very rapidly. Technology is changing really rapidly. So how well prepared are you now? How well prepared will you be 5 years from now as you compete with people not just in this country, but people in other countries who are in the same industry. And the answer is that you will be prepared if you continue to be educated, if you continue to gather additional information and knowledge. How can you do that? You can do that by getting a master's degree if you're an undergraduate. If you're a graduate student looking at this video, you can do it by doing a better job in your master's degree. And if the need be, going off and getting another master's degree 5 or 10 years from now, or at least some additional training, and perhaps some of you a PhD. But the more knowledge you get, the better off you'll be in this very competitive world. And that's the final conclusion that I would like to offer you in this long series of videos. I hope this series has been helpful to you and informative, and that it has given you some reason to think about your own future. If so, then this series will have been a success. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Goodbye.